Hello everybody, my name is Leah Clearwater and I'm the Brand and Sales Manager at Flametree Wines. Hopefully you've tuned into our two previous podcasts where I had the pleasure of interviewing Ron Fraser at Atticus Vineyard, who supplies us with some beautiful Chardonnay fruit, and Mark Jolliffe at Jolliffe Vineyard in Williabrup, who supplies us with some glorious Cabernet fruit. Today, we're actually speaking with the people who turn this quality fruit into the delicious drops that our customers love, our winemakers. So I'd like to introduce you to Cliff Royle, who's the chief winemaker, who's been at Flametree for quite a number of years.
11 years.
11 years. And we have Julian Scott, who's our winery manager and also winemaker as well. So we are probably going to venture into a little bit of technical talk for those wine nerds out there that like to hear about barrel ferments and wild ferments and malolactic fermentation and things like that. But we'll also dive into a few uncharted topics as well. So just to start off with, there is a bit of a worldwide movement out there around the word provenance, which is really being connected to and being in touch with where your food comes from. Supporting local, eating from local farms and producers and growers. And the same thing applies to wine, and that's really what this video podcast series with Flametree Wines is about. It's the provenance of Flametree, and really looking at the process of vine to wine. So food to plate, vine to wine. That's kind of what we're doing here. So I'm just going to have a bit of a casual chat. If there's any sounds in the background today, please forgive us. We're in a functioning winery. There's trucks driving around outside and forklifts and all kinds of things going on. So you're really getting a behind-the-scenes glimpse into Flametree Wines. So to kick us off, guys, can you tell us your memory of the very first time you tasted wine and what was your impression of it?
Yeah, I remember as a 15-year-old, my dad was part of a local wine club, and he used to drink wines like Kaiserstuhl and Taylor's and Redman, and if it was a special occasion, he'd have a Henschke wine. And I remember at this time, at around 15 years old, Dad putting in front of me a little thimble full of Henschke Hill of Grace and trying the wine and thinking, oh, that's interesting, but not really for my taste. I actually didn't really like it at all. So for me, my first wine experience was more around Cruchon Riesling and Fruity Lex here from Brown Brothers, which is where I think we probably all start with our wine journey, and that was when I was around 18. So,
yeah, and Julian?
Yeah, fairly similar, really. My father, he was a pharmacist, so he didn't have a big cellar, really, of wine. So my first real experience, or first taste of wine, I guess, was more was cask wine, like Cliff said. So not high quality and didn't thrill me, didn't think much about it apart from the fact there was alcohol, and I was probably under 18, I think, at the time, unfortunately. But yeah, so for me, the first time I really tried wine and actually considered it was probably Horton's White Burgundy, and I was probably 22, I think, out to dinner with my girlfriend and bought that and sort of thought, oh, that's nice with Thai food. And sort of started thinking about it, but didn't really get into wine until I was 25, really as such, where I started to see wine down here.
Well, that leads into the next question. So what made you want to become a winemaker, and how long have you been making wine?
I've been making wine since, I've been in the industry since 1998, so a fair amount of time now. And what made me want to become a winemaker, that's an interesting one. I pretty much moved down here to go surfing, like a lot of people
Sounds
do.
common.
Yeah, to get better at surfing bigger waves and travel the world, and didn't leave. So that was basically it. And then, I was working at Lewin as a kitchen hand and saw the lab. I'm a chemist already, or was a chemist already from uni, and saw the lab and thought, oh, that's interesting. Was starting to get into wine a little bit at that point, and thought about, I love Margaret River and surfing, and then I thought, wow, there's opportunities here with wine, and I found wine quite interesting. And my friend came back from a vintage, which I didn't know what it was, and he said he just finished vintage, or he's actually doing vintage and he couldn't cut it. He's actually a viticulturalist now, my friend from Stella Bella, Steve Martin. And he said, no, that was terrible, can't do that. And I said, what are you talking about? What's vintage? and he said, "I'm harvesting grapes, blah blah blah." So I said, he says, "You want a job?" I said, "Okay." He gave me a number, Virginia Wilcox. I rang her up, and that was that. Started the process and loved it. Pretty crazy year. It was very hard work and all that. But yeah, that's sort of it was
Kicked
a great
it all
start.
off.
And yeah.
And how about you, Cliff?
Yeah, my progression came via beer. So my first job when I was at uni in the mid-80s, without going into too much detail about how old I am, I started working with Phil Sexton and Gary Gazzatti when they had Matilda Bay Brewing Company. So my first real job after McDonald's was at the Sail and Anchor, pouring beer to start with, and then got involved in the retail side of things, really loved the beer and food side. Kate Lamont was at Sail and Anchor doing the food, and then progressively got more and more interested in the wine side of things. And then fast forward quite a few years later, I met Stuart and Janice when I was managing the Redback Brewery bottle shop over in Melbourne. And they said to me, "Look, your interest in wine could take you down this path." And Stuart said, "Look, I'm off to Voyager Estate. If you start pursuing this career, I'll have a job for you." And in 1997, I started as assistant winemaker at Voyager.
Wow.
So that's my history in the
So
wine
beer,
industry. Yeah.
Lab.
Yeah.
You never know what's going to get you into the wine industry.
No.
So we've already interviewed, as I mentioned earlier, two of our growers. So Flametree's in a scenario where we don't have our own vineyards. We don't grow our own fruit. I'd like to ask you both, what do you think are the benefits of sourcing and buying your own fruit from across the region as opposed to growing your own grapes? Because a lot of customers out there assume if you have a wine brand, then you have vineyards.
Yeah.
But there's so many different models. Some
there
people grow grapes and get the wine made by contract.
Yeah.
Some people, there's lots of different scenarios. So what's the benefit of the scenario at Flametree?
I think the obvious one is that Margaret River's a big area, and that if you can isolate regions that produce different varieties better than others, it makes sense to take them from those regions. And certain varieties are definitely more suited, and in general terms we talk about the reds to the north and the whites to the south. That's very general, and we know it's 100 kilometres long by 27, 30 kilometres wide. So we think that taking different parcels of fruit, you can then blend them together to make more complex and more interesting wines. And also viticulture is obviously about risk, and sometimes you don't want all your eggs in one basket as well. So when you own your own vineyards, you're at the mercy of the elements, and sometimes that can be disastrous and sometimes it can be wonderful. And this also just assures us a little bit of more consistency around product from different regions of Margaret River.
Yeah, do you have any thoughts on that, Julian?
Yeah, I agree with what Cliff said, and yeah, I think that if you have I've worked for companies, as Cliff has, that are just single vineyard producers, and that has its limitations. And especially in some years, there might be a certain year where that vineyard was affected by whatever it might be, some natural weather event, or the season was not favourable for another reason, and then it's really hard. So where you have all your wine is a bit affected, and you might have to look at other vineyards to bolster it, or so that's a big factor. So I think there's that. It gives us consistency, I believe. And like Cliff said, you really can showcase the whole Margaret River region and pick the eyes out of it into what we want to make.
Sorry, there's a fly there. Get away, fly. Okay, so the other two podcast videos we did, one was featuring Chardonnay and one was featuring Cabernet. Most people who have travelled to Margaret River or love Margaret River wine will know that Chardonnay and Cabernet are our hero varieties, or some people call them our flagship varieties. So you'd be pretty guaranteed the majority of cellar doors that you go to, you're going to find at least one Chardonnay and one Cabernet, if not a Cabernet Merlot. Yeah. Here at Flametree, we have 3 of each, and I'm talking about straight varietals here, not blends. We have them here on the barrel, so we have an Embers Chardonnay, a Flametree Chardonnay, and an SRS Chardonnay, and similarly with the Cabernets. So, Cliff, why do we make 3 of each? Like, what's the rationale behind that? And
yeah, well, exactly what you said. I mean, they're the strengths of the region. Make no mistake, Chardonnay is the greatest white grape variety in the world, and what better place to showcase it maybe outside of Burgundy than Margaret River. So we think that playing to the strengths of the region make perfect sense. So three Chardonnays. One is the more entry-level Embers, which is softer, richer, juicier, not as oak-influenced, not as wild, ferment-wise, and just a bit more conventional and easy drinking with or without food. And then you go into the Flametree range, where it's a mix of vineyards, predominantly from the south, with that sort of telltale Flametree structure and that lovely grapefruit pith and citrus. But it's still got a Margaret River thumbprint to it. It's still got that lovely Margaret River fruit. And then the single vineyard, or the SRS wine, is a single vineyard expression of our best wine in more of a Burgundian technique type style. So it's very flinty, it's very minerally, it's very funky. It's got some nice sulphides and lots of layers and textures, and is the pinnacle of what we can do in a given vintage.
That's awesome. What about the Cabernets?
Yeah, so I think, again, similar to the Chardonnay, what our approach was to try and make the best value Cabernet with the Embers. So fruit forward, as easy drinking as Cabernet can be, which is not that easy, because Cabernet has a lot of structure. But we've been working at that for 10 years now, and I think we're getting there using wild fermentation. For the reds really helps to soften their tannins and make them more complex, but more drinkable. Yeah, and as you move up the scale, we introduce more oak, more new French oak, and higher quality parcels of fruit and more tannin. All the way to the mid-level Cabernet. We got a Cab Merlot, but the mid-level Cabernet has mainly Willy Aberrup focus to the fruit, and probably around 30% new French oak, so a balanced amount of oak that we find, and it's very juicy and a bit more structured and more food orientated than the Embers. And then we go to the SRS, which is the pinnacle again for our reds, and that's the best single vineyard Cabernet we have for the season. Willy Aberrup again, and gets pampered in open fermenter, and lots of skin contact, lots of real focus on tannin extraction, pressed to 2 barrels at the end of fermentation, and then 50% new French oak, so quite a lot. And it's all about that beautiful structure and line, and that wine will not be, for the punter, will not be so approachable, but for the wine lover, it's something really interesting and will age really well and great with food. So yeah, that's sort of the reason we have the 3 tiers.
It's an interesting point you're talking there about customer preference. I mean, even just being in the cellar door, you can line up those 3 Chardonnays or those 3 Cabernets in front of a group, a tour group might come in, and it's quite polarising, Some people will just clearly go for the Embers because it's approachable, it's ready, it's jumping out of the glass, and then you see other people respond really well to the classic Margaret River styles of the Flametree, and then yet others really like that point of difference that the SRS range brings. I think that more savoury, more complex, more layered sort of wines that are ones that you're not just sitting there quaffing, they're probably ones where you'd sit there and contemplate life, They're a bit deeper, like a deeper person, if you were personifying wine.
Yeah, and we often say that at that SRS level, we want to make the person drinking them think about them a little bit more. They really need to be decanted, a nice big glass, and they do definitely go better with modern food trends. So that's sort of a necessity, whereas an Embers wine that has both those wines go into only older oak, so there's no new oak influence on them. We want them to be a bit looser knit and more easily drinkable.
So getting back to the whole vine to wine, the provenance idea, I spoke to Ron and Mark out in the vineyard the other day and asked them about the interactions that they have with you. So I'd like to put that, the flip side of that is because you don't own the vineyards, you are having to form and manage a relationship with your growers. Yeah. How important is it that you go out there and visit them and work with them and communicate throughout probably mostly the growing season? Like, how does that work? Because most people wouldn't understand what's the actual process. How do you get the best out of that
We obviously
situation?
have long-term relationships with a lot of these growers, and we're very upfront with what we need from the fruit. And we have a long-standing relationship with them. They understand what we're after, and most of the time they deliver that. But certainly along the road we have to be there often to make sure the work's being done, and sometimes talk about things if they haven't, or at the level. And as we know in agriculture, it changes all the time. So we have to have some conversations sometimes if the weather's gone array and we need some more shoot thinning done, or if the crop looks heavy and it needs to be reduced, or if we need a bit of hedging done, or we're a bit concerned about water or lack of, or bird pressure, those sorts of things. But generally they understand exactly what we're looking for, and we sort of pay for that fruit accordingly. And it's the longer I think your relationship goes for, the less you need to talk about it. Once you're on the same page, generally it's not a big problem, and we don't have too many issues. And we both get out early in the season when we're sort of in that spring, October, September, October time, and then as we get closer to vintage, Julian obviously gets brought back into the winery, and it's a bit more difficult for him to get out during harvest. So that's generally something I do on my own.
Yeah, but you go out into the vineyard as well until you're pretty much chained to the winery once the fruit start comes in.
When we start getting 2 intakes a day and a backlog of wines in here, it's a little bit hard. Occasionally I'll get an opportunity to nip off before work in the dark, which is not great. With your head torch, you can't really tell what's going on, but you've got to get a good idea. Or after work, which is dark as well, really. But so early days, like Cliff said, we go out together, and it's really good to see the vineyards every week or two and see them changing. Pretty important to do that because every year is different, and it's sort of some growers have a lot of area they have to manage, and we're just a small part of it. They know what we want, but it's always good to visit with them and continually talk about it. But like Cliff said, being involved with them for now 10 years, some of them, they know pretty much what we want, what we need, and what our style of wine we need to get out of that fruit. And that's the biggest. With the new guys, that's a bit, you've always got to work very hard together on that, and taste wines here with them, taste previous vintages wine with them, and then sort of get an understanding of what we want to do with it. And like, for example, last year we got some Chardonnay off a northern vineyard, and it was pretty lean, but it was grown in a way to be picked riper than we pick. So we discussed that, and they said, yeah, look, we can make sure that we don't water it as much. We go more unirrigated and manage it in a way where it will ripen earlier where you want it to be. There's a way you can manage vines to get them to perform where you want them to be.
Just got to navigate it with the grower.
Yeah, and everyone's really, so it's got to have a good relationship and discuss it. But so unfortunately at harvest time I don't get an opportunity. It's more looking at samples and just convey that to Cliff and say, hey, the sample's looking ready pretty much. What do you think? And he'll go out there and probably ready or not. That's what it's all about.
So it's a lot of teamwork, yeah.
It is, and it goes back to the age-old, it's got to be good communication, and it's got to be respectful and two-way.
Funny, you mentioned, it's quite poignant, you mentioned about going out early in the morning during vintage or late at night. A lot of people have romantic notions about the wine industry and what's involved, and they like to get their photos taken out in front of the vines, or they love coming and seeing the winery. We have a lot of people, can I go and have a look at the winery? So there's a lot of people that think it's just all, out picking grapes and stomping on them, and what are the not so romantic parts about being a winemaker and working within a winery or during vintage? I'm sure there's lots, and I'm not trying to de-romanticize it, but people like to hear, what's it really like?
Oh, look, it can be quite stressful. I think that's something that people would appreciate, because you only get one chance to harvest grapes well, and you can't say, oh look, I got that wrong.
Stick them back on the vines.
Yeah, give me your glue, I'll just put that back on and give it another week or two.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you can't then say, oh, I missed that and it's a bit overripe. You have to get it right, and I think over time you get a bit more trust in your decision making around the style of wines you're looking for. That can have its present its problems, but overall the wine industry is a pretty fun place to work, and that's why we're in it.
You're so positive. What about in the winery? Have you ever had a big disaster or anything happen during vintage that?
Yeah, haven't. I don't want to say. It's so many things. So many things could happen.
Yeah.
In a winery, which could be bad. It's not a safe place. So romantically, growing grapes and making wine is awesome. It's an artistic process and natural. However, it's also very industrial. So we have lots of equipment that's very dangerous, and you can get hurt, and you're very tired, you're working very long hours, and you might not think clearly sometimes. So yeah, I'm the safety officer here too, so it's all about trying to be safe and working practices. I guess that's probably the industrial side of it might be the less enjoyable side. You just have to be safe around all this equipment. Saying that, barrels as well, forklifting is dangerous. You can drop barrels, that happens everywhere. We have procedures to make that as safe as possible. But yeah, it's regarding vintage, like Cliff said, can be stressful, and that's not an enjoyable aspect of it, in that it all has to come in at once, depends on the year. We have some years where, because we get fruit from everywhere, some years where north ripens later than south, so they ripen at the same time. We've had that. That's just a
So you've got trucks pulling up with fruit and
we can only book it in.
Yeah.
We've only got one. So probably here the biggest stressful factor is we have one press that's 10 tonne equivalent, and there we have 300 tonne or more to put through that one press. And we do a lot of Chardonnay, and if it's all ready in 2 weeks, it's a bit of a logistical management issue. And then the other, probably the side, I reckon that the least enjoyable side of a winery is the back end.
How do you mean?
The effluent side.
Oh, literally the back
that's
end.
That's what we have to manage as well. So that's probably the side
Wastage
that no
management.
winemaker would want to
Okay.
deal with. But you have to make sure you're sustainable and that it's completely treated in the best way possible without an environmental impact. And so you have to maintain your system. So every week I go check it out, and like right now there's a few issues I've got to get amongst it, which is not great.
So
It's
a lot
not
of
like
people
wine.
probably wouldn't even think about that. All the wastage issues that you've got to deal with. Yeah. So we've talked about the non-romantic parts of being a winemaker, and what are the things that you still, after so many years of being in the industry, that just put a big smile on your face and you think, this is why I'm in this industry?
It's a unique industry because we get given a different hand every year. That's the part I really was drawn to. I didn't really see myself doing the same thing every day in an office building in St George's Terrace, and that was sort of where I was headed. So I really like the fact you get your hands dirty, but it also combines a whole heap of different skills around microbiology and metabolic biochemistry and understanding all the microbe side of things. I find it really interesting and really challenging at the same time. And then the good winemakers, I believe, and I quite often talk to good producers that I look to and look up to, they make good wines regardless of the conditions. And so I think that ability of winemakers to be able to say, okay, this year I've been given these parameters and so I need to go in this direction rather than read from a recipe, sets them apart from most of their peers.
Yeah, so you have to be responsive to, we're dealing with Mother Nature.
That's right.
You can have cracker vintages where the wine makes itself. It comes in and it's clean and it goes through ferment really nicely and everything just flows. But then there's other vintages where you've had a wet, cold season and you've got to deal with fruit with problems.
That's right.
I suppose even that's a positive point when you can overcome that or navigate your way around it as a winemaker and say, okay, this is our lot.
That's right.
What are we going to do with it?
Yeah, and it's easy to make good wine in a good vintage, and everyone pretty well does. And if you don't, then you're in the wrong industry. But if you make good wine in a lesser perceived vintage, then you get reward for that, and people recognise it. I think that's more rewarding than anything, and that certainly puts a smile on my face when we've sort of been through the adversity and still come out the other end with a really good result.
What about you, Julian? What makes you feel happy being in the wine industry?
Yeah, probably. Just when wines turn out really good.
Yeah.
But really, that's the best part, when I can, you try something and it's just worked out really well, because you never really know how it's going to end up. And also when people really appreciate the wines that are made. I think that's the best part.
When you see customers enjoying the
Yeah,
wine.
the cellar I work in there occasionally. But when people really love the wines and enjoy them, then it's like a reward for all the hard work you've done, really. But it's just I just love the enjoying the products that you are involved with, really, products of your hard work. So
that's awesome. One of the things I'm proud about working for Flametree Wines is, even though it's a young winery relative to the 50-year-old region that we exist within, we've achieved quite a significant degree of recognition right from the get-go, and acclaim, particularly for our Chardonnays and Cabernets. Cliff, because you've been here the longest, what are some of the highlights in terms of, awards or scores or things like that that stand out
well,
for
obviously
you?
I was first drawn, one of the reasons I actually came here was on the back of the Jimmy Watson Trophy for the 2007 Cab Merlot that was awarded in 2008. So that was something that I thought, well, it's an incredible achievement to be the first ever red wine. And it probably in those early days we were better known as a red producer, and then over a period of time probably progressed more with our Chardonnays. And it was certainly a big event when the 14 SRS Chardonnay was given 98 points from James Suckley and put in his top 10 wines of the year, and we were one of 2 Australian wines in his top 100. So
wow.
That really put us on the map in the international stage. And then the 2016 SRS Chardonnay was awarded 8 trophies in national wine shows. And again, that put us on the map in the domestic market. So, and then as a result of that, we've had great show success for those wines over the next few vintages. And where that wine's on pretty tight allocation, has just recently got a 98 point from Hugh and Hook for the 19 SRS Chardonnay. So I think that wine's pretty well known
and
now.
a gold medal at the
and gets it was in the Trophy Taste Off at Perth show, and so I think we're in a nice groove there with what I would call that sort of more leaner, more modern style Australian Chardonnay that seems to be resonating with the gatekeepers.
We keep mentioning SRS as our top range. That stands for sub-regional series.
That's right.
So that can be a bit of a controversial topic within the region.
Yeah.
But obviously we're sort of hearkening back to the original proposition from Dr. John Gladstone's, where he identified some key areas within the region. There's nothing wrong with anecdotally discussing that and selecting areas. But can you explain what that SRS tier within our portfolio is all about?
Yeah, sure. So obviously, like you said, it's Gladstone's proposed regions, sub-regions going back into the 80s, and it was more for me to identify that because it's such a big region, we just wanted to let people know where we get our fruit from. So it was more about just identifying.
Sort of storytelling, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. It was part of the story. And you can't just say, oh, we got our fruit from the north or fruit from the south when it's such a big region. And so for us, it's a tool that we can use to identify where we get our Chardonnay and Cabernet from and our single vineyard wines. And so that sub-regional series sort of came from there. And I'd always really liked the Wallcliffe area, which was when I was at Voyager and Xanadu and Lewin, and I really like the grapefruit that you get from the Jinjing clone, and I just think that it really leans itself to that finer, tighter style Chardonnay. And so we just like to identify that, and then probably Carradale for Sauvignon Blanc, and then obviously Cabernet for Willie Abrupt Cabernet. So it just seems to go hand in hand, that really strong Cassis and Mocha blackcurrant, and they're the 3 regions that I think do those varieties better than anywhere else.
And we also have the Sauv Blanc from Carradale.
Yeah, that's right.
And Syrah.
That's right. So and the Syrah is a bit of an interesting one because people might think you go further north for Shiraz, and you certainly can, and you make a bigger style of wine, but we like the more elegant, almost Pinot style Syrah, where we make it more like a Pinot, and that also comes from Ron Fraser's Atticus vineyard.
So quite far south.
Yeah, it is, and it's very perfumed, very elegant. We obviously use a lot of whole berry and some bunches and some dried stalks, and it gives a really sort of ethereal, or like I say, almost Pinot style of wine that's got that beautiful pepper and spice and blood plum and licorice and star anise. And I think that, and I know Julian agrees, that those sort of wines are better suited to Margaret River than those bigger, more extracted styles that can sometimes have that sort of bit of winter green tannin to them.
I love hearing winemakers use all those descriptors. It just rolls off your tongue. You mentioned before the SRS Chardonnay is probably a little bit of a diversion from the classic Margaret River style, if you like. Not that we can categorise that. There's so many different styles of Chardonnay across Margaret River, but it is a variety that we're known for. Why is the SRS different? You sort of mentioned funky. I think it's quite savoury. So what's happening with the winemaking? I'll throw this one at you, Julian. What's happening with the winemaking in the SRS that sets it apart stylistically?
Yeah, okay. So This stems back to a long time ago, 2012, I reckon. I'd been here, I started in 2010, been here a couple of years, and I came from Hamlin Bay, Stella Bella, and at that point, 2000, we were making quite rich Chardonnays generally around the traps. Lewin had influenced everyone. My old boss was from Lewin, so yeah, we were doing yeasted Chardonnay, picking at 13 Beaumet and ending up at 14.5% alcohol, getting trophies for that stuff, and it was rich and yummy wine, you know, like, but by no means interesting really in what we're doing now. So anyway, in 2012, Cliff brought in a few of his bottles from his cellar, and he's got a lot in his cellar.
Oh, I haven't seen this cellar
yeah,
yet.
He's got a few bottles in it.
Might have to invite myself
over. He's drank a few of them, I reckon. But anyway, he brought in a couple of really good Burgundies that he really liked, and that was it must have been a 2000 and I can't remember the year. If it was 2014. It was 2012. 2010 Royle. Yeah, so it was a Royle and a couple other ones. But the Royles with a really distinctive character, like super complex. And I saw it and was like, oh my goodness, what is this? I didn't understand it at all. And I was like, I don't know, Cliff, what is that? So complex, it's like out there. And so sulphide-y and different. And I was like, wow, I had never seen anything like it.
Did you like it?
No.
Okay.
But Cliff said, we're going to make this. And I go, what do you mean? He goes, we want to make something like this. I was like, oh yeah. And at that same time, in 2011, so that same year, I think, the Heytesbury from Bass, 2010, was a bit like that. It was really complex. Got the trophy at Mugs. We're looking at that going, whoa, that's different.
The Bass Felix.
Yeah,
yep.
And Virginia's pretty open, so she explained to me how she did that. And so we started playing around with it, that style.
Yeah.
And then, so 2014 was the first year we got puncheons. We're looking at the Abbey Lake wines, and puncheons work well for them. And they're like, you can't, they're there, those large format.
500 litres?
Yeah, 500 litre puncheons. We started playing with them, and you get a much more reductive ferment, and you get a beautiful savouriness to your wine, and the new oak is diluted because it's a much lower surface area. So, the wine stays fresher. So using that process in puncheons, we found we could make a wine in that style a little bit, and then by picking at a certain time and targeting certain vineyards, we get a real beautiful complexity and salinity and savouriness to the wines, and fine-tuning which oak fits it. So through the past 6 years, we've been sort of working that out, and I'm not saying we have a recipe at all, but we've worked out a way where we can capture what we see in that wine and sort of make that style. Yeah. Naturally, I'm not forcing it really, but sometimes we might do certain things to push it in a certain direction, but it's all wild fermented, whole bunch pressed. There's nothing, we don't add anything to it. It's just all natural combination of oak and fruit.
And the rationale behind that is that we believe that Margaret River has this incredible fruit power. And so we're trying to work against the fruit power almost to make something that's a little more medium bodied, but more textured and layered and a bit more international in style. I mean, there's plenty of people making that really strongly flavoured Margaret River style Chardonnay.
Which people do love.
Which people do love. And,
I love it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, it goes back to when I started at Voyager, people said to me, so you're going to make Lewin Estate Chardonnay? And I said, I thought that was a really strange question.
Isn't Lewin making Lewin Estate Chardonnay?
Well, that's right. And we shared a border with them, so everyone sort of figured we'd go down that path. But we actually went with an earlier picked, leaner, finer, tighter, more textured, layered sort of wine, and we've progressed that even further here with a bit of creative license around making the wine more savoury and using the puncheons, and I think it's a really good, a really good foil to a lot of the styles that are being made here. And certainly now people are looking at those wines picked at 11.5, 13% alcohol. They're a bit more balanced. People never fell out of love with Chardonnay. They fell out of love with the sort of Chardonnays that were being made. They were heavily maloed, they were heavily oaked, they were really, really charry and quite high in alcohol. And this wine style, I think, is back where people would like to see Chardonnay and more comfortable with it. And finally, people are sort of heading off Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc back to Chardonnay.
Amen.
I love to see that.
Well, that is the beauty of this region, I think, when we're talking about Chardonnay and Cabernet and a whole plethora of other varieties that we're now showcasing. We're going off into alternate varietals There's a lot of young guns, and even some of the bigger wineries are trying out new varieties. But I think these are always going to be our staples because of the soil and the climate that we have here. It's just a perfect alignment. And the beauty of it is that the fruit that comes from across the region and the styles that you can make out of it is just such a broad range. And so if you are a Chardonnay lover or a Cabernet lover, you're bound to find a number of wines within the region that you like. So some people would like the Embers, some people would like the Flametree, some people like the SRS. That's right. So they are, the queen and king of grape varieties. So to finish off, a bit of unashamed promotion. We all work at Flametree. It's been a bit of a tough time initially with the COVID situation, with the cellar door being closed, but we're seeing unprecedented visitation at the moment. A lot of people, we're all stuck in the state, which is a good thing. We're all safe, and people are coming down from Perth and up from the south. As the winemakers, this is your opportunity. Why should people come to Flametree? I mean, not just talking about these particular wines, but what have we got on offer here in your opinion?
Well, I think it's a beautiful building for a start. It's a lovely lawned area. You can grab some forage out of the fridge and grab yourself a glass of wine, go and sit out in the sun, and it's a perfect time of the year for it. So the staff are really friendly and helpful, and whether you're a novice or whether you're an expert, I think you'll find a good experience here. And we've also got giant Jenga.
Yes. And we have a winemaker that sometimes jumps behind the counter if it's busy, you won't see that very often.
No, occasionally, if we're sitting up there, if we're tasting wines and it gets busy, we'll jump behind.
Yeah.
Yeah, I reckon the good range of wines, like I said, because we source from everywhere, got really good consistency. And the reason to come, I believe, is you can try the whole range if you want, or focus in on your style. We also have a family tree club, the member club, and for that we make specific wines which are only available here. So I think it's worth coming to.
Yeah. Well, thanks for your time, everyone, today. Thanks, Cliff. Thanks, Julian. And thanks to Jab Agency, who have filmed these video podcasts for us and done a great job, Kaio and Alex.